Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. Today we have a very good prompt for you guys called find K length substrings with no repeating characters. So this is a very good prompt, right? So let's read the prompt statement, right? So it says given a string S, right? Let me zoom in real quick, you guys can see everything, right? So given a string S, right, and integer K, return the number of substrings in S, right, of length K with no repeated characters. Interesting. Sounds very familiar, like the problem similar to this before, but let's see. So this example, right? Have fun on LeetCode. That's true. We have a lot of fun here on LeetCode, man. K equals 5, the output is 6. So how do you get to that, right? So there are 6 different substrings, right? Okay, that have a that fits the constraint, right? Which is there are no repeated characters in those substring, right? And they are of length K, right? That's kind of what it is, right? So we have home here. Notice that K can be larger than the length of S. In this case, it is not possible to find any substring, right? It's not possible to find a substring of length K, right? Because it's only 4, right? So we'll return 0. Okay, because the length matters as well, right? So yeah. So how do we do this, right? So for this type of problem, right? Of those length K, right? Yeah. So they want us to find the substrings in there. So the substring thing, straightforward way, we just do a double for loop, right? Generate every possible substring that we can get, right? Of length K, right? For every length 5, we calculate this. Boom. Are there any duplicate characters? If there are, then I don't add you to my count, right? So there are none. So that's good. Then we generate this. We see any dupes? Nope. Any dupes? Nope. Right. Good. Then we go here as well. Right. We keep doing this over and over. Right. You know what I'm saying? So that's how it would pretty much every time we generate a one that doesn't have one, right? We increment our counter plus 1, and that's the thing that we will return at the end, right? Pretty much telling us that we found 6 substrings of this length, right? That has that substrings, right? So we can't can't skip around, right? It has to be a subarray, like contiguous, right? It has to be that, right? So we can't skip around the array and do that, right? So yeah, so how do we go ahead and do this, right? So you saw that the thing, the double for loop is not very efficient, right? Especially for very large strings. It's not gonna work out. So what we're going to need to do is to be a little bit more clever, right? And normally to bring down the time complexity, right? We introduce the different nice techniques, that we've done before in the past. Either 2-pointer, sliding window, slow and fast, different types of things, right? Can help us to bring it down because it's kind of too high right now. So this style problems, right? We talk to substring subarray. We normally love to use the window, right? The sliding window approach where we have this fixed size, we have this dynamic sliding window as well, right? But since this is a K one, right? It goes into the realm of fixed size, right? Static, pretty much, right? So F on LeetCode, so we have that, right? How do we go ahead and do it? Is to pretty much create a sliding window, right? And as we're sliding, right, we're adding stuff to our window, and we can add stuff to our window, right? We can decrement, we can shrink stuff from our window, right? So you guys can see it, right? Since we can do that, right? That's how the sliding window thing works, right? As we're adding, right? And we become a particular size, we keep adding as much as possible, right? Once we become a particular size, we would check, we need to easily find a way to quickly check, does that window, is it a valid one, right? If it's valid, then I go ahead and add it to my count, right? To the number of substrings that fit my constraint, which is there are no repeated characters, right? And that's how I would pretty much do it, right? So as we're going through, right, so how the algorithm will work. So how do we easily find if we have dupes or not, right? In our current window, right? Okay, we expand, we add H, okay, we add A, right? We add V. Let's say this was an A, right? How could we tell, right, if we have seen this before, right? So it looks like we're gonna need to keep track of some data, right? Metadata about our window, right? To quickly have reference to the characters that we currently have, right, in our window. And once we have that, right, and as we're expanding, if we encounter a character that we've already seen before, I say this was A, right, then we pretty much shrink the window as much as possible until we get to this one, right? Because we know anything anything to the left of that particular character, right, won't matter because this character will cause uh this character would cause a like the for the window to not be valid, so I can't use it anyway, right? So I will shrink as much as possible, right, until this character is no longer in my window, right? I shrink, shrink, shrink. I get to here, right? So the window will stay here. In that case, if E was A in that particular case, right? So this is how I would do it. Okay. And then it's not a length 5, and then I would keep expanding, expanding until every time I get to a length 5, I add it to my output results, right? So this is very similar to a problem I've done. I'll probably link it. You guys could check it out. It's pretty much the same code that we're about to use. We always slide with the right pointer, shrink with the left, right? It becomes once we get a valid window, we increment our count, right, for this particular one, right? So let's quickly go ahead and do it real quick, right? I think it'll make even more sense. So we all start with our left pointer, and what we're gonna do is have also a max, right? And also, forgot to know the data structure of choice, right? That I said that we need to quickly know how, if we've seen a character before, right? It's the set, right? The set is going to allow us to quickly capture um, we've seen this character, right? Pretty much. Okay. So now we're going to loop through as we're looping through. All right, the right pointer is less than as that length, right? Right plus mix. Okay, so now that we have that, what's next for us is to pretty much char right. We're going to edit that char at the right pointer. Okay, that's helping us in expanding. And what we're going to do is to make sure that the window, right, this character is not in our set yet, right, before we add it, right, because we're going to add it every time as we're expanding, right, as that add char right. Okay. So how do we make sure that, what I'm saying? So while the set contains s char right, we've seen this character before, right? Before I need to shrink it, right? Pretty much move my window on my left side, right? Shrink it as much as possible until this character is no longer in there, right? So before I get rid of the left, whatever character the left pointer is pointing at, right? I need to left plus plus, right? So I need to remove it from the set, right? So remove char left, right? So I remove this character from the thing, right? So while the set contains this character, char right, remove this character from the set. Okay. And then once now my window becomes valid, then I add the right character to the set. Okay. Okay. So now what's next for us, right? So we're going to need to keep track of the amount. Go to 0, right? So what we're going to do now is to, okay, add it there. So what next for us to do is to essentially just, so we had the right character, and now we next. So now, the window should be valid in a way, right? So we add the character, the right character to the set. So now we have a valid window, right? So now the only thing that we need to check now, right? Since we may have shrinked it like a lot, right? We need to say, do we have a valid size of K, right? And in those instances where we have a valid size of K, right, and we've already made the check that there are no dupes, and because as we're adding, right, every iteration we're checking does this character exist already in our window, right? Since right, if it exists, right, then we're going ahead and remove this character, right, so that there's no dupe, right? So everything before we check, right, before we add this, we always make sure that the window is valid, right, and we remove characters accordingly, right, as we're shrinking, right? Okay, so make sure you guys understood that, right? So on this should be amount plus plus, right? So I did call it amount plus plus. Oh no, I even had the max the left side speed it. All right, so we return the amount at the end, right? So yeah, that's kind of the whole gist of the algorithm, right? So we start off by doing a sliding window approach. We expand with the right. We add H, V, E, F, right? We see we have a window of 5, right? So this never gets executed because there's no dupes, right? Then we go ahead and add it. Check. We add it to the amount S1, right? Then we keep doing the same thing. We generate this one. We see there's no dupe. That's good again, right? We added +1, right? So yeah. So this one, 2, 3, 4, 5. This would cause a so for this one, right? We add fun, boom, boom. Once we get here, right? If there's any dupe, we shrink it as much as possible until there's no dupe, and then we add the right character, right? So looks good. So first press. Let's see if we pass these small test cases. Looks like we did. Let's press submit. All right, looks like we passed all these test cases, guys. If you guys found value, you guys understood the old logic and the thought process, in the comment section, right? I tried to explain it to the best of my abilities. If you guys liked it, subscribe as well if you're new. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.